Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm Edmundo Resendez. Now that Donald Trump is in office, immigration is an issue that is on the forefront of the political debate. Vicki Gaubeca serves as the director of the ACLU Regional Center for Border Rights, based right here in Las Cruces, New Mexico, where she has helped develop and implement its mission of addressing civil and human rights violations that stem from border-specific immigration policy. She is our guest today. But first, let's watch a story about Victor Hugo Rodriguez-Tello, who is one of hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers and immigrants living in the U.S. who are waiting for outcomes in the severely backlogged immigration court system. Here's his story.
My name is Victor Hugo Miguel Rodriguez-Tello. I'm born in Guatemala.
Victor Hugo Rodriguez illegally immigrated to San Diego in 2004. A decade later, he had his first run-in with immigration enforcement. Rodriguez said about 40 people arrived at his house that night, including local and federal law enforcement.
Entraron y nos pusieron a todos de rodillas que estábamos que según
It was a federal sting operation aimed at catching people harboring immigrants who are in the country illegally. Authorities arrested Rodriguez and 5 other people inside the house, including his 8-month pregnant U.S. citizen wife. She was released a few hours later. Rodriguez went into the custody of the Department of Homeland Security. A few days later, he was transferred from a detention facility in Chula Vista to one in Calexico, where he stayed for about 2.5 months. While waiting for his bond hearing, he missed the birth of his second daughter and lost his job.
Right. You don't just stay detained for months without a hearing. I mean, that's what they do where? Where would they do that? Guantanamo?
We reached out to the Department of Justice, who issued this statement. The Immigration Court schedules bond redetermination hearings for the earliest possible date. The detained caseload remains a top priority for the agency. According to data from Syracuse University, the backlog of cases waiting for results in immigration court has grown every year since 2007. In 2007, there were around 175,000 cases. Now, there are more than 450,000. Dana Marks is president of the National Association of Immigration Judges. She says that investing in more judges would speed things up and cost less in the long run.
We believe that it's a cost saving both right up front, that the people are detained for shorter periods of time before they have their first hearing, but also that it would eventually cause some reduction in the costs associated both with detaining someone during the appeal as well as the appellate courts needing to be funded.
Nationally, the cost of custody operations is budgeted at $2.4 billion for the fiscal year 2016. Rodriguez's detention alone cost taxpayers an estimated $12,000. Rodriguez was eventually released on bond. He is back with his family now, waiting for his green card and a work permit.
They have several steps that they need to complete before the process will be done, but I'm very positive regarding their case.
The government has given him permission to stay in the U.S. on humanitarian grounds while his case progresses. Rodriguez says he's relieved his detention is behind him.
I'm staying here with my family, with my wife and my daughter. I'm so happy.
But sometimes at night, as he falls asleep, his mind wanders back to his cell in Calexico. His next hearing will be in March 2017. For KPBS and iNewsSource, I'm Roxana Popescu.
Welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm Edmundo Resendez. Vicki Gaubeca is the director of the ACLU-NM Regional Center for Border Rights right here in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Vicki, welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America.
Thank you for having me.
Let's go back to November and ask you, as somebody who works for the ACLU and specifically with dealing with border rights, how did your life change from election day to election day morning, the day after?
I think that after we got over the initial shock, that because I think a lot of people were counting on the polls, and we sort of had made an assumption of what the outcome of the election was going to be, and it turned out not to be so. So very quickly after that happened, though, we were very ready to begin a new strategy on how to address some of the issues that we saw during the campaign process. I mean, in general terms, the ACLU does not come out supporting or opposing candidates, but there were some things that President Trump said during the campaign, certain things in his rhetoric that gave us pause as far as what constitutional rights could be violated if he actually implemented some of that campaign rhetoric.
Let's talk about his executive action that he has taken regarding immigration. One of them, of course, as we know, is the border wall and border security. What is the other executive action that he has taken?
Well, there are several executive orders that he has signed right away in sort of rapid fire succession in the first week of his presidency. We are concerned about many of them, but two of them that rise to the top are really the ones that are focusing on so-called sanctuary cities. And then the second one is this sort of building of the border wall and adding more border enforcement resources at the U.S.-Mexico border.
It's an additional 5,000 border security officers.
Exactly. This executive order orders the building of the wall. It also sends 5,000 more Border Patrol agents to the border region.
States like Texas have been passing or looking to pass laws against sanctuary cities. How will this affect our region right here in New Mexico?
I mean,
with the president's now executive order against sanctuary cities?
Right. I mean, I think right now the cities of Santa Fe, the city of Albuquerque, and I think even Las Cruces is contemplating some kind of welcoming statement that basically is about public safety. I mean, I think that many of our law enforcement officials have the interest of protecting public safety, and so there is this need to follow this community policing model to make sure that witnesses and victims of crime are not afraid of picking up the phone and calling the police. Because if they're afraid to do that, then public safety is affected for everyone. And that is really the fundamental reason why these policies are so important. Go ahead.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, how are sanctuary cities defined, by the ACLU? How do you define a sanctuary city? We know Santa Fe has declared itself to be a sanctuary city. Have communities like Las Cruces declared themselves to be sanctuary cities?
I don't think that there is an overall definition of what sanctuary city is. And I think that that's going to be a key question in ACLU's response. But I think that one thing that really needs to be clear are, well, actually two things. One, every government entity can decide how it's going to work with the federal government. And so that's really key. The Trump issuing a statement saying that he's going to defund cities or law enforcement because they engage in a good community policing model is commandeering basically the work of these cities and these local law enforcement, and it would violate the 10th Amendment in the U.S. Constitution. So for sure, the ACLU will intervene to make sure that public safety is preserved for everyone in the community and throughout the state of New Mexico.
Let's look at everyday undocumented immigrants, everyday residents, legal U.S. residents, everyday American citizens. How, with Donald Trump now in office as president, what concerns should everyday people in this country have in dealing with immigration issues?
Do you mean about their rights?
About rights.
Yeah, so I think that border communities, and this is, part of what's problematic with the executive order that Trump has issued related to border security, is that first of all, it mandates the building of a wall. It also adds these 5,000 Border Patrol agents that we've already mentioned. But it's not really, something that is actually effective. Like, let's just talk about, as an example, an easy example, the wall, which is actually something he promised during his campaign, and he then turned around and tried to implement. But he never asked the question whether that was really an effective thing to do, particularly when you think about how much of U.S. taxpayers' money is going to be spent on this wall, and also the fact that the net migration from Mexico is at zero, and also whether this really doesn't, particularly the deployment of 5,000 Border Patrol agents. Let's think about that question. This is an agency that is the largest law enforcement agency in the nation, and which unfortunately has a track record for committing human and civil rights violations in the border community, including profiling people who have been here for generations because of their appearance. We do not want to see those human rights and civil rights abuses increasing, so we definitely want to see accountability and oversight mechanisms that come along with these executive orders to ensure that people aren't experiencing any abuse.
Now, the ACLU has worked in the past with INS to look at these abuses, alleged abuses. Is this something that the ACLU is now prepared to, again, go back to the Trump administration or go to the Trump administration and say, here are our concerns? And did the Department of Immigration, were they wanting to add additional officers to their force?
I think that's a really good question. And in the past, and under the Obama administration, we did work with both ICE and U.S. Customs and Border Protection, both agencies that are under the Department of Homeland Security, to put in effect some reforms on their practices to ensure, for example, constitutionally required conditions of confinement, to ensure that people are treated with dignity and respect that is afforded to anyone, regardless of their immigration status in this country. And we will continue to do that under this new administration. But we have some concerns as to whether or not that's going to be feasible. It all depends on whether the administration is open to this, but we're definitely standing ready to effect any kind of policy change that ensures that the Constitution applies in the border region, and it applies for people who are here without work authorization.
Let's talk about your concerns, because I know there are many. You have concerns right now with the executive action that he's taken, but what about some concerns down the road when this becomes a debate in the House and in the Senate? What concerns is the ACLU working on right now to address the immigration debate?
There are many, as you rightly so, concerns that you've identified. Not only are we concerned about the rights of immigrants and the rights of border communities, but we're also concerned about some of the rhetoric that's related to doing this extreme vetting of people who come to this country. We're very worried about, in one of the executive orders, he actually included a clause about determining whether people come here to claim asylum in a fraudulent manner, which gives us pause, because never in the history of this country have we actually it's almost like guilty until proven innocent. When a person is obviously fleeing a country because of the violence that's in that country, and then they are detained and questioned and treated poorly while they're being detained, that is not an appropriate response to people who are coming to this country and they're fleeing violence.
Overall, what has the ACLU done to prepare for this? Are you providing training? Are you doing community outreach? What kind of conversations are you having with the communities throughout the country?
We're doing many things. We're looking at the legal frameworks that we can use to protect the Constitution in the interior and at the border of this nation. We are reaching out and providing Know Your Rights trainings throughout the communities, throughout the country. We have every single state in the nation has an office at the ACLU, an affiliate office. We have also national headquarters, but we're basically reaching out to just about every corner of this country to make sure that people know what their rights are when they're encountering both local law enforcement along with federal immigration officials. We're also creating a network of volunteers, and we would like to encourage anyone who's interested in volunteering with the ACLU to either go to our national website or to go to the New Mexico ACLU website and to sign up to volunteer for some of the actions that we will be taking in the community, and also to be informed about what some of our events will be in the next 100 days.
What kind of phone calls are you fielding right now from undocumented immigrants? What are their concerns? What are their questions that they're asking you? In particular, looking at the Dreamers, that received a reprieve from President Obama and now are looking at many concerns, including being reported because they filed paperwork to say they were undocumented.
Right, I mean, and that's something that, just so you know, the ACLU is very concerned about any kind of sharing of that information. We will be working to try to protect that information from being shared with federal agencies who intend to, use that information to harm DACA recipients. But definitely our offices have been getting called from many Dreamers, many parents of Dreamers, some of us who had called us when Obama had announced relief that was like deferred action for childhood arrivals, but was actually offering the same kind of relief for parents. We had some of those conversations. They're very worried. I mean, these are individuals who have lived in this country, who have contributed to our economy and our culture, who have no criminal background. They should be allowed to stay here and continue to contribute to our country.
Let's stay here in New Mexico and look at recent action by a legislator from Albuquerque who proposed to make New Mexico a sanctuary state. Mm-hmm. What are the possibilities that something like that would actually pass, and what protections would we have in this state for undocumented immigrants?
I mean, this legislation that was introduced by Patricia Roybal Caballero is actually a very good resolution, and we completely support it. I think that New Mexicans recognize the contributions that the immigrants, the people that come to this state have for both our economy and our culture. I think we're a very welcoming state. I think it would speak well for it to get through the legislature. I feel hopeful that it will pass the legislature during this session, and that I hope that the governor would also signal that or find reason to sign it and make it law for our state.
Well, let's look at Governor Martinez's track record. Is this something that she would be willing to sign or something to even discuss? Because we haven't heard from her as of yet, as of the recording of this show, regarding this.
Yeah, I'm not sure that, I'm going to hazard a guess and say that she probably won't be interested in signing it, principally because the very first executive order she signed when she came into office was one that actually allowed state troopers to inquire about immigration status in the course of a criminal investigation, which reversed an executive order that had been issued by Governor Richardson. But I am hopeful that she might consider signing it.
Let's go back to sanctuary cities again and talk about the rights that undocumented immigrants would have if policies against sanctuary cities were to pass. Mm-hmm. What rights would they have? as undocumented immigrants if they are to be pulled over by a county sheriff, by a local police officer? What are you advising them to do? What would you advise them to do?
I mean, I think that's what's part of our Know Your Rights training. And I think the short answer to that is that nothing really trumps the Constitution. So that things like protections from illegal search and seizure, those apply to everyone regardless of immigration status. Things like the freedom of expression, the right to remain silent, those are rights that apply to everyone regardless of immigration status. That applies to a student, to a tourist, and someone who's here without work authorization, and to U.S. citizens. So those are the rights that we want to tell people they have, regardless of what is happening right now. And I don't anticipate us changing the Constitution anytime soon. But I think the most important thing to remember about these welcoming sanctuary city laws are the role of local police, because they play a key role in maintaining public safety for everyone. And that's why it's important for people to be able to call them when they experience or witness crime. I mean, it just makes sense. Otherwise, public safety is affected for all of us. And I think that's the key message that we want to convey about the so-called sanctuary or welcoming policies, that the local police don't really have the business to be engaging in federal immigration laws.
Can you share with us some stories of some families that you've encountered recently and their concerns for the policies that are going to be set and put in place and what they're feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just yesterday I was talking to a student who is a DACA recipient and who's very, very worried, not just about his safety, but about the safety of his parents. We're basically creating a situation where people are going to go into hiding, individuals who for all purposes are U.S. citizens but don't have papers, but who have in every way, shape, or form contributed to this country. And I think there's a lot of fear in the community. And my hope is that we can figure out a way to balance the needs of national security with a good common sense immigration policy. And I'll tell you right away, building a wall is not a rational national security policy. It is basically an expression of racism and ethnic bias against our neighbors. And so we just really need to step back and look at this rhetoric and really ask ourselves the question of is this how we want to be perceived in the world? Are these the values that we want to show in this country is standing for? I think these are very fundamental questions we need to ask ourselves.
Let's look at the border states like California, Arizona, of course, New Mexico, and Texas. What kind of conversations are you having with other ACLU directors and how they're addressing specific issues in their communities?
We're having conversations with not just the 4 ACLU affiliates in the southern border of the United States, but with ACLU affiliates in the northern border as well, as to requiring better accountability and oversight mechanisms to ensure that civil and human rights violations don't happen in our border region or any other part of this country as far as it comes to law enforcement. And so we are all working together to look at the ways that we can actually protect our border communities to ensure that all families can live freely and safely and with dignity.
Here's my trivia question for you today. How long has the ACLU been around?
We're about to come up to our 100th anniversary.
And in those 100 years, you've dealt with many a president, many a Congress, many different leaders. Is the ACLU prepared to deal with a President Donald Trump and his way of managing things in this country?
We're absolutely ready. We have been ready, and we also count on a great support of people throughout the country. We are developing solid strategies to address any kind of initiatives that are unconstitutional and that affect our communities and the rights of our communities. We're absolutely ready for that.
Vicki, thank you very much for joining us here on Fronteras and Changing America, and want to wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much for having us here.
For Fronteras and Changing America, I'm Edmundo Resendez. Thank you for joining us.